Week 3 picks presented by Zevo. People friendly, bug deadly. I'm Chris Hassel. We are going to get winning picks against the spread on every ranked team from Brady, Quinn, and Danny Kanell in just a second. And there are a lot of games this week. All 25 ranked teams are in action. There are only 2 games pitting ranked opponents against one another, and only 2 games where ranked opponents play FCS teams. We won't pick those. We'll pick everything else, including Penn State back into the rankings, taking on Auburn on CBS. 364 days after Penn State beat Auburn in a thriller, Auburn gets its chance at revenge, this time right at home at Jordan-Hare. And just like last season, both teams are unbeaten and looking for a statement win. Both teams began this season unranked, but the Nittany Lions used a thrilling victory over Purdue to help vault them into the top 25. And sixth-year senior Sean Clifford has the offense humming.
I want to win games.
On the other side, Auburn's head coach Brian Harsin almost lost his job after 1 season as head coach. And the jury is still out despite a 2-0 start. The Tigers needed a second-half comeback on Saturday just to fend off 24-point underdog San Jose State. But a win in a big spot against a ranked team could turn everything around.
They just keep getting better. The teams that we play, we know Penn State. We know they're a good football team.
It's 2 huge college football brands from the 2 best conferences in the country. Auburn, Penn State, Saturday on CBS. All right, looking forward to that one at 3:30 Eastern time on CBS. We also have a couple of ranked matchups. Miami at Texas A&M. The Aggies favored by 5.5 at home after losing to App State on that field last week. And Oregon is back into the top 25 despite getting crushed by Georgia in week 1. They're home as 3.5-point favorites against BYU. Brady Quinn had a great week 1. Danny Kanell had an awful week 1. So last week, Brady gave Danny a bit of a pep talk.
I would argue this. Look, you're not out of it. It's early.
Oh, yeah.
There's always a time for a great comeback. You don't win the games in the first, second, third quarters. You win it in the fourth quarter, Danny. So stay optimistic, buddy.
And he did. He took advantage of it. Danny Kanell last week, 11-5-2, while Brady goes 5-11-2. And now it's just a 2-game difference. Brady Quinn coming back to reality just a little bit. Let's get Brady Quinn and Danny Kanell in here. Brady, your pep talk worked. That's the good news.
Yeah, well, I mean, we took a different philosophy last week, if you'll recall, and that philosophy kind of applies this week as far as how things are going to work out. There were a lot of huge lines, huge spreads. Unfortunately for me, I went with a lot of the favorites in this case, and fortunately for Danny, he went with a lot of the dogs. That worked out, so I had to change up my strategy this week because once again, of all the games we're picking, how many games? 23 games, something like that?
I think it's at least 20 games.
20 games.
A couple of them were
games,
not
like
because they're against FCS teams.
Right, but 16 of those are double-digit spreads. So you've got a lot of big lines that we've got to look at and try to make a decision on. I think even the bookmakers are having a hard time right now. I don't know how Danny feels about this, but it's tough picking these games. I mean, you got some gigantic lines you're trying to figure out. Can the favorites really hold that line, or can their backups come in and maintain or build on whatever lead that they've had?
Yeah, Danny, the top 5 teams in the country are all 4-score or more favorites in their respective games.
I have a hunch the odds makers and the sports books, they're pretty good. I think they're okay with setting those lines. I think they're doing all right. But I think what we're seeing, and I think it's really last year you start to see it. I think we're seeing more parity than we've seen before. And there is this, upper tier where Georgia feels like they're unbeatable. But even them, I'm interested to see how they respond this week. But really, I think there's more parity. I think it's a result of the transfer portal. We have so much movement across college football. It's hard to get guys up to speed and go execute right away. And I think coaches are starting to realize that. And you're seeing programs like in App State, that has players that have played in the program, that have played together. They come together and they start to do some special things. I mean, shoot, we saw that all across the Sun Belt with 3 of those teams knocking off, impressive, road wins. So I think there's more parity than there's ever been, and I think it's great for the sport.
To Danny's point, it's because of the transfer portal. I mean, bottom line, I think it starts with the quarterback position. Those guys who would be sitting on a bench, maybe behind a guy who is playing out there, but they're very capable of leading a team. they're finding homes elsewhere. So they're elevating that level of play of everyone else out around them. But even other position players, when schools are looking for guys to step in who've got experience, who've proven themselves at some level of college football, they're able to go to that portal, bring them in, plant them in right away, and get better play at that position. So call it the free agency of college football, if you will. It's been really effective, I think, for really all schools at every level, whether you're a group of 5 team or even a Power 5 team that's not necessarily up there with the likes of Georgia and Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, and the likes of that. So
let's pick them, presented by Zevo. And let's start with the game on CBS. We had it last season as well. It was a really good game up in Happy Valley. Penn State, Auburn, Penn State winning that game last season 28-20. And Auburn has not been impressive at all this season. They almost got beat by San Jose State last week.
Yeah, and really, when you look at their offensive struggles, it starts with TJ Finley. He's struggled throwing the football. He's actually been worse versus drop coverage as opposed to pressure. But it really doesn't give you much hope. And in particular, going up against the Penn State defense that I think struggled week 1 versus Purdue, gave up some yards, gave up some points to Aiden O'Connell in that group, but really turned things around versus OU. And so it's hard for me to want to take those points in Auburn here, even though they are that home dog. We saw how effective that was in some cases last week in college football. I'm going ahead and laying the 3 points. I think Penn State has a much better feel for what they are right now. Defensively, bringing pressure with that Manny Diaz high-pressure defense. Offensively, now you see Nick Singleton, the outstanding freshman, had himself a day last week, almost 180 yards on the ground. They know they can rely on him, and they've started to continue to build in the passing game, whether it's Sean Clifford, even the talented freshman, if he gets some opportunity to come in. So I feel a little more confident about the identity of what Penn State is. I still can't really tell you what Auburn is at this point, so I'm laying the 3 points in Penn State. Danny?
Oh, Chris, I'm fascinated to see how this week plays out as Brady and I kind of, our records are coming together if our philosophies do, but not yet. I want to see some more lock unities, but not on this one. I'm on the opposite side of this one, and this is more of a theme that I have this week that's sort of, hey, let's not write off the SEC just yet. I think this was last week was a disaster for the conference. And usually that's the time to step in and buy them because the athletes are still there. And while Penn State has been impressive and Auburn has not, I think this might be a game that they had circled and possibly were looking ahead to as they haven't been challenged yet. I think this game will be somewhat about TJ Finley, but more about Tank Bigsby in the ground game, able to establish themselves where the SEC typically has a pretty significant edge on those fronts. And I know Penn State was tested and passed it against Purdue, but I think this will be have a Super Bowl-like feel for the Auburn Tigers. The only thing I'm not sure on, I think the players want Brian Harsin to be around. If they do, they're going to play their tails off for him. If they don't, they kind of read the writing on the wall and say, hey, he's gone or anyway. I think this game could get ugly. But I'm going to go ahead and take Auburn, the home team with the field goal. And I think you might see a little bit more of an open game. So I'm going to go over the pretty low total of 49.
All right, again, that game is on CBS 3:30 Eastern Time from Auburn. That's going to be a great atmosphere. All right, 2 ranked versus ranked matchups this week. Number 13 Miami at Texas A&M, just hanging on into the rankings after, that's a faux pas. That's not A&M. That's the Texas logo. But
well, Texas should be ranked up there. Texas A&M should not be ranked.
Yeah.
I'm still not quite sure why after losing to App State we feel they need to be ranked in the top 25. I digress. Looking at this matchup between these two teams, I just have a hard time with what I saw on film, last week from that offense for Texas A&M. I mean, Haynes King looked lost. Jimbo Fisher's been known for being a quarterback developer. I just haven't seen it so far. They had a really hard time finding any production. And if you'll recall, this is a team that in App State that gave up a bunch of yards, bunch of points to North Carolina. And so I'm a little bit surprised as for what the disconnect is at Texas A&M after the great recruiting classes and what we've seen in the past, why they can't seem to get things going. So, look, Tyler Van Dyke, all he does is throw touchdown passes. He's done it 11 straight games, as you can see, since it started last season. And again, this is another scenario where I feel like I have a better feel for what Miami's going to be and what Mario Cristobal has brought to this so far. So, when we're breaking this one down, I'm going to go ahead and take the 5.5 points because I know Texas A&M is playing at home. It's a tough place to play. The 12th man is obviously going to be a part of all that. But I think it's a lower scoring affair and one in which Miami has the better quarterback and the better quarterback play. So I'll take the 5.5 points. And I don't know that they're going to need the 5.5. I think they're going to win this thing outright.
Wow. Man, calling the upset right away. I'm in total agreement on the under. I think this game's going to be lower scoring. I mean, Texas A&M's offense has been atrocious. But I wonder how many of these coaches that are considering quarterback changes are kind of getting closer to that 4-game window. Because remember, if they bench them before then, the players can transfer. And they want to make really, really sure that they make a decision, because if they bench a guy, they know there's probably a good chance they're going to lose that quarterback. But as we get closer and Haynes King has more of a body of work, I wonder if there's a temptation to go to Max Johnson to the bench, who I think would be a better option for Jimbo Fisher. But again, kind of going with the SEC trend, I think this might have been a game that Texas A&M have been looking forward to and overlooking App State as a lesser opponent. And that guy right there you see running the ball, Devin Achane and Anaya Smith, they have been two absolutely phenomenal weapons for the Aggies. I think this will be, Jimbo is conservative as it gets. He runs slow. I think this will be a lower scoring game. Again, in the trenches, is Miami ready to step up, take this show on the road? I love Tyler Van Dyke. I just need to see it against a better opponent. One good thing for Texas A&M, they were tested. Miami has not yet. Couple cupcakes. And even against Southern Miss, the game was ugly for a half, and they kind of got out of there. I think they were looking ahead to this game too. I think the Aggies are going to get it done at home. Bounce back week for them.
Okay.
This will be a big game too for Tyler Van Dyke and just evaluating him for next year's draft. You know, Texas A&M is one of the better defenses they'll face all year long, outside of probably Clemson within the ACC conference. So if you're looking at this matchup, you're going to see a lot of talent evaluators kind of saying, all right, can Tyler Van Dyke show us some more improvement, show us that next step, as Danny kind of alluded to, with A&M being one of those better defenses that they'll have to face.
And if Miami wins, hype machine is going to be like turnover chain level back in the day for Miami. They'll be top 10. All right. BYU, number 12 in the country, coming off the overtime win at home against Baylor. They go to an Oregon team that many would say does not deserve to be ranked. They're favored in this game by 3.5.
Yeah, big performance by Oregon last week versus Eastern Washington. So they kind of get back some momentum, I guess, if you will. It's hard to really understand, though, where Oregon should be sitting right now. I mean, they got absolutely blown out to start the season against Georgia, and you would think you'd be more prepared for that sort of matchup, given that's the only thing you're thinking about the entire offseason leading up to it. So, you know, clearly there's a talent gap when you play a team like Eastern Washington. So I'm not sure what to expect in this matchup. Look, Oregon, it's tough to play up there in Autzen. It's a loud environment. And I think when you're looking at BYU, the question becomes, is Puka Nacua going to be healthy for this particular game? If not, it's going to ride on the arm of, you know, Jaron Hall, who's been a part of that rushing attack, but Christopher Brooks, the running back transfer from Cal, he's going to be a part of this. The BYU defense has played well, though. They've only given up, less than 3 touchdowns per game. So this is one of which I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. I'm going to go ahead and take the 3.5 points here, and BYU, if it was less than that, I might be on the other side of this bet. To me, the better play here is the under, Danny.
Yeah, I'm totally agreeing with you on the under. I think this will be more of a defensive affair. I would love Oregon if it was 3. I'm on them laying the 3.5. It's not one of my favorite plays of the weekend. But I think this is about, you mentioned Puka Nacua. I don't think, I've been trying to research, seeing if he's playing. I don't think he is. I don't think Romney is either. I think they're without some of their weapons. And that concerns me against an Oregon team, which I know it was an embarrassing loss against Georgia, but Georgia has embarrassed a lot of good teams. And that's what, this is one of those spreads where I look at, I'm like, wait a second, because I was like you, Bray, I was like, BYU, man, they're good, and they're a good program, but can they take this thing on the road? And I think Oregon might have just had, it was the first game in it, in a backyard of the Georgia Bulldogs in Atlanta. It was ugly for Bo Nix, who wasn't great against the SEC foes, but he was better against lesser opponents, and he was better at home throughout his tenure in the SEC. And that's where I think playing at home crowd environment, BYU coming off an emotional late win against Baylor in that environment, I think it might be a letdown spot for them. So I'll take the Ducks. If BYU wins this game, there is a chance they could run the table and be in the conversation for the playoffs. So something to keep an eye on maybe down the road.
Especially the way Notre Dame looks right now. I mean, that game's looking much more winnable for them as well, that on the neutral site in Vegas. So there's no doubt about it. I mean, they might be putting the College Football Playoff Committee in a bit of a predicament, because I don't know that they look like one of the top 4 teams watching them play right now, but their record's going to say otherwise.
And they've got a matchup with Arkansas coming up. Right now, Arkansas, a top 10 team. If it stays that way, that could be the big marquee win in addition to Baylor, Oregon, and Notre Dame on that schedule for BYU. All right, the guys don't agree on much here. They do agree on the unders in the 2 ranked v. ranked matchups. Under 48.5 in Miami A&M, under 56.5 BYU and Oregon. College football picks, week 3, presented by Zevo. And look at the big numbers that SEC teams are catching this week. Georgia's at South Carolina. Still a 24.5-point favorite. Ole Miss on the road is a 16-point favorite in Atlanta against Georgia Tech. Bama and Tennessee, 48.5-point favorites. And Florida in the swamp against South Florida.
Did you hear the comments from the head coach at Akron, Joe Moorhead, about the matchup this week?
Yeah, what did he say?
He said, well, the 72 Dolphins and the 85 Bears weren't available, so I guess we're going to have to play the Tennessee Volunteers.
Said no one for the last 25 years about the Tennessee Volunteers. But this year, so far, so good for the Vols. Let's start with the new number one team in the country, the defending champions, the Georgia Bulldogs, 24.5 at South Carolina, which is always a tough place to play.
It is a tough place to play, and with that line, it's scary. But that being said, Georgia has looked so dominant this season. You know, last year you look at their defense, the way they recruited and developed, but it's also the way they rotated in those defenders to prepare them for this year and a chance to go back and repeat. Stetson Bennett has been phenomenal. Hasn't thrown an interception this entire season. He's really taken that performance, the semifinal game and national championship game, and the confidence and everything else, and rolled it into this season. He looks like a completely different quarterback and player. So I know exactly what Georgia is. They look like the number one team in the country. South Carolina, on the other hand, it's really hard to really look at Spencer Rattler, and it's just not clicking yet. He's continued to turn over the football. He actually has an interception in the last 5 games dating back to his time in Oklahoma. Defensively, they haven't been as good as I thought they would be at this point. I don't feel great about laying 24.5 points here, but I'm going to do it because I think Georgia has just been that dominant when it comes down to it. So, Danny, here it is again. I'm laying down a bunch of points for a big spread. Where are you on this one?
I'm actually on the home dog in this one. Shane Beamer, I think he relishes this opportunity. You know, he's going to have his team. You're going to get the best effort out of his guys. I'll be sweating this one out, though. This one, to me, has the feel of a backdoor cover. I think I'm on the under as well. I think it'll be a lower scoring affair. I think you could see Georgia's offense potentially challenged and tested for the first time this season. But this, to me, is that South Carolina does not have that continuity yet. But Spencer Rattler is the type of quarterback who can run around, make some sort of circus play that could put up some points later in the game and get you that backdoor cover. But I think this is going to be close. As far as the cover, I could easily see Georgia being up 30. And then, late, they're just trying to keep it respectable for the home fans, getting a cover, and Spencer Rattler makes some sort of circus play to keep this one close. So, like Georgia to win, obviously, here on the road, but I think it could be a slower start for them, big test, probably a better defensive front maybe than they saw against Oregon, but on the road, in Columbia, hostile environment, Spencer Rattler making some plays off the cuff, which frustrates even the best defenses out there. I'm going to go ahead and take Carolina.
I wonder, after all the momentum South Carolina and Shane Beamer built at the end of last season, heading in the offseason, you're bringing a guy in Spencer Rattler. Everyone's kind of saying, okay, we feel like we have a guy that can still play at a really high level. It just hasn't worked out this year. I kind of wonder if this game gets off to that sort of start, if there is still that belief, if there is still that level of play from South Carolina, because, once you go up against Georgia and they go up by 3 scores, 4 scores, whatever it's going to be early, I wonder if this is a team that's going to keep believing in what Shane Beamer's been preaching. I'm a believer in him. I just don't know with everything with Spencer Rattler and bringing him in if it's going to work out the way they had hoped.
And it's not like Georgia, even when they've had games in hand, has given up late touchdowns either. No. They've only given up 3 points all season to this point, and they played Oregon. That's the team that scored against them. All right, Alabama hosting UL Monroe. Bama surviving against Texas might end up being the best thing for them. 15 penalties in that game, the most in the Saban era, and poor ULM coming in for the beatdown.
Well, they're coming in for a beatdown. It's a gigantic spread, but it's one in which, look, the ULM gave Nick Saban a loss back when he first took over as head coach from Alabama. So I don't know if Nick Saban still thinks about that, but the reality is you saw some flaws. I think one, undisciplined play, as you point out with all the penalties, but also, look, the lack of protection for Bryce Young. The Texas defense was harassing him throughout the game. We thought that was going to be the opposite of that game, and with Will Anderson Jr. and Dallas Turner pressuring off the edge, that wasn't the case. The Alabama wide receivers had a hard time getting open. I know they're going to have an easier time getting open versus ULM, but the reality is I think there's some things you can take away scheme-wise and apply now moving forward. So this is one where it's just too big of a spread. Alabama's going to win this thing, and it may even be close to the 40.5 points. But after what I saw last week, I need to see a rebound. I need to see some sort of response to feel better about where Alabama is at. Because right now, it looks like, Danny, they've got some flaws or at least got some holes within their offensive production and ability to create a big play.
No doubt about it. Terry Bowden, son of Bobby Bowden, is going to take the Warhawks in there. He's going to get the cover. I'm with you on this one. I think this one will be inside the number. I wasn't going to go that bold. But I think this is a massive number. And I also think Bama's the type of program, they don't need any style points. They don't need any Heisman campaigns because you're going to, there's another big spread I might take the other side on coming up. But this is almost like a bye week for them where they're going to try to correct all those mistakes. And it's a good week for Nick Saban to get after his team, which was the most undisciplined performance out of a Crimson Tide team that I've seen maybe in Nick Saban's tenure on that stage. I also think it was a very physical game against Texas, way more physical than I think most people thought it was going to be. And they're a little bit banged up, a little bit nicked. So maybe you see those starters come out a little bit sooner after they get that very business-like approach to this game, in hand, comfortable, take out some of your guys, rest them up. But I think in the end, that 48.5 is just too much for me. So I'm taking the Warhawks as well.
So Terry Bowden's team, 48.5-point dogs against Nick Saban's team. Terry Bowden's former team, the Akron Zips, getting 48.5 at another SEC team in Tennessee. Akron lost 52-0 to Michigan State last week.
They did. And look, they've struggled this year. There's no doubt about it. I mean, Joe Moorhead, we kind of joked about his comments in regards to, what this looks like heading into Knoxville to take on a Tennessee team that's absolutely rolling right now. Hendon Hooker's a player that I think you got to start kind of talking about maybe as part of that Heisman conversation with the way he finished last year and so far how he's gotten into this year. Look, Tennessee's going to win this game big. I don't know that they're going to cover the 48.5. Now, I could be a little gun shy here given the fact of how last week went for me with none of the favorites covering those big spreads. So I'm somewhat betting on that as well. But Tennessee wins this one easily, Danny. It's just 48.5 points. It's too much for me. It was too much in the last game I had to pick with a 48.5-point spread.
Remember that 50 number's the big one. That's the one you never take. 48.5 sucks you in there just like it did for me. So the difference to me in the Bama number that was 48.5 and this one was 48.5 is exactly what you talked about. Hendon Hooker very much should be in the Heisman conversation. And this is a typical pick where I would fade this all day, coming off an emotional win on the road against Pitt, which was physical. Now they got to come back. How do they ramp it back up? But it is in Knoxville. There's more excitement around this program than there's been probably in 5 years, building off a solid first season for Josh Heupel. But it is about the numbers. Josh Heupel, offensive mind. They know what it would mean to have Hendon Hooker bring home a Heisman Trophy or at least even be in that conversation. Cedric Tillman's been an absolute beast for him. It's one of the better quarterback wide receiver tandems in all of college football. I think they're going to put up some massive numbers in this game. And because I don't think Akron's going to be able to score more than 3 points, maybe 7. But I do think Tennessee will get their 50 plus in a monster offensive showing. So I'll go ahead and lay the massive number. I don't love it. Again, there's better plays to be had, but if you're going to force me to pick one, I'm going with Tennessee because of that philosophy.
This is where I always feel good about the backdoor cover with the 48.5-point spread. At some point, someone's going to do something for Akron that's going to take all the joy away from Danny laying the 48.5 points.
We'll see. They didn't last week. They didn't score against Michigan State, 52-0. Hendon Hooker, Heisman hype. Anthony Richardson, Heisman hype has, it's gone away for now. That was a rough performance last week in the loss at home to Kentucky. Get-right game here against South Florida with Florida given 24.5.
I just don't know what to expect from Anthony Richardson. Week one we're talking about him looking like this athletic phenom who could potentially be looked at as the number 1 overall pick because of the skill set, the arm strength, the athleticism, all those things after a good win versus Utah. Then you have to follow it up with a game versus Kentucky, and he looks like a shell of himself. So inconsistent. It makes it hard to predict what he's going to be in a game where are they going to be let down? How are they going to respond after losing to Kentucky at home? And now with South Florida coming in, which I don't think poses much of a threat. Florida's going to win this game. It's just, are they going to win by 24.5 points? So I'm on the other side of this one. I think they win comfortably here by 3 scores. I don't think they end up covering the spread, though, Danny.
I'm with you. It was funny because there were so many comps given out for Anthony Richardson. I fell into it too. Josh Allen, Vince Young, Cam Newton. I think we just left. There could be a side of Jamarcus Russell in there too that we need to figure out. All right, which direction is this going? Phenomenally talented young man who still hasn't thrown a touchdown pass to a Florida Gator. He threw one to a Kentucky Wildcat last week, but very much unknown in a young quarterback's career. He's a great kid. We're having some fun with this. So I hope, Gator fans aren't upset. But I do think he has to develop and he has to mature And the number one barometer with how to judge a quarterback is how do you respond after adversity. I hope he responds in a big way, but until I see it, this is a USF program. It's going to be their Super Bowl. I mean, we saw it last year in a bowl game with UCF playing against Florida. Florida better be ready to go. Jeff Scott will have that team ready to come in for a fight. I think Florida wins this game. I do think it's a bounce back, but it's hard for me to envision that Florida team just blowing out any opponent, letting alone one that's going to come in state, kind of stepchild feel, chip on the shoulder like the South Florida Bulls are going to come in with. So I'll go ahead and take those 24 and a half all day long.
One more SEC game to pick among ranked teams in the SEC. That's Ole Miss, and it's the shortest number. They are minus 16 at Georgia Tech. Who's going to be quarterback for Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss? Is Jackson Dart going to get a chance here?
Jackson Dart, Luke Altmaier, I'm not sure it matters so much. I mean, Georgia Tech makes winning look hard. They did last week versus West Carolina. I mean, even Jeff Sims, their quarterback, who I think has a lot of talent and ability, just he's not showing it. So, look, I'm laying the points here with Ole Miss. I think Lane Kiffin knows in this day and era of college football, you have to have those style points, and with where they're currently ranked, they didn't impress some people. Not that this win is going to be overly impressive, but it will be if they win by a lot. So, look, you could say they've got a quarterback conundrum, but I think both Jackson Dart and Luke Altmaier are very capable of running this system, running this offense. It just comes down to who's going to execute better, at least to the standard of Lane Kiffin. So to me, it doesn't matter, Danny. We may see both of them play at some point if this thing gets out of hand. It's more about the fact that Georgia Tech just cannot seem to get any traction offensively, even versus a lesser opponent last week, with Jeff Sims throwing an interception, having a bit of a tough time in the passing game.
This game scares me. I'm on the other side, the home dog, and the way they played against Clemson. And, of course, Clemson's offense has struggled against everybody. But I do think this is the type of game where Jeff Collins, who's probably going to lose his job, it just looks bad for Georgia Tech. But before the season gets out of hand, I do think his team showed some really impressive fight. The talent is just not there. And while there are still some question marks at quarterback, I think this might be a time to take take Georgia Tech in this spot while they're still figuring that out. I think if I'm lucky and win this one, because I do think this will take a bit of luck, you might see a Sims touchdown later against Ole Miss's defense, which is still a work in progress. So I'm going to take Georgia Tech, the home dog. Again, don't love it. This is more of a contrarian play because Ole Miss clearly, once they figure out their quarterback issues, they could be off and running. I'm just banking on maybe them sputtering out the gate early in Atlanta.
And as of Tuesday evening, Lane Kiffin has not yet named a starting quarterback in that game. Let's recap the picks from Brady Quinn and Danny Kanell here in the SEC with huge numbers. Agreement, lock unity even on Monroe and Alabama. It's Monroe to cover the 48.5 and over 60 points. Also agreement on USF, South Florida, plus the 24.5 at Florida. Picking every college ranked game against the spread presented by Zevo. And what's going on with Michigan? Get a better non-conference schedule. They've played three of the worst teams in the country in their non-conference. They got UConn this week, 46-point favorites. We already picked Penn State, Auburn, that's on CBS. Ohio State given 31.5 at home to Toledo, and a really good game, 7:30 Eastern, out in Washington, where the Huskies are 3-point favorites against the 11th ranked Spartans. Let's start with number 3, Ohio State. Chris Hassel, Brady Quinn, Danny Kanell, and the Buckeyes bounced back with a win against Arkansas State last week. I thought this number might be a little bit higher than 31.5.
I thought it would be too, although I think if you look at the past couple of weeks, Ohio State has not covered the spread. And then in this particular matchup, they haven't covered the last time these two teams met. Bottom line is, look, Toledo is not that bad of a football team. Now, they haven't played anyone. Obviously, they've excelled versus Long Island. They've excelled versus UMass. Completely different challenge. I mean, the Toledo defense is ranked as one of the top defenses in the country. I don't know that that's going to be the case after this week versus the Ohio State Buckeyes. And look, DeQuan Finn is kind of everything within their offense. So I do think they'll be able to score some points here late versus Ohio State, but this Buckeyes team is drastically improved defensively. Offensively, they are expecting to get Jackson Smith and Jigba back. That'll help to go along with Egbuka as well as Marvin Harrison Jr. So it's going to be a prolific showing for C.J. Stroud. I'm taking the points, though. I think Toledo will be able to have a backdoor cover here and keep this thing close when it's all said and done, Danny.
Man, I hate how many opposite sides we're on in these picks today. I mean, we'll see what happens. I'm on Ohio State. I'm laying the points. I think the Notre Dame game, I think it was pretty surprising. You know, the offense, everybody's, what's wrong with the offense? It's normal. It takes time to get up to speed. College football doesn't have a preseason, right? I mean, they don't have that time to get up to speed. Now they're starting to get their kind of regular season form to them. And C.J. Stroud is starting to look the part of the Heisman, favorite that he was coming in. And now they're starting to add some more pieces. With Jackson Smith and Jigba out this past week, who stepped up big, and you mentioned him, was Marvin Harrison Jr., was phenomenal in that position. So I think they're getting better and better. I think the offense is really starting to click, and I think the defense will be able to shut down Toledo. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the points. Big number for Ohio State for the Buckeyes, and I think their defense holds them in check. So I'm going to take the under here.
All right, let's move on to that big spread. The Michigan Wolverines, number 4 in the country, but what have we really learned about them so far with this schedule? They are 46-point favorites, and they've outscored their opponents by 45 a game the first 2 weeks.
Look, what we've learned, I think, is J.J. McCarthy is the better option of the two quarterbacks. I mean, when you look at them both going in and playing these games against the same opponent, you see more production from J.J. McCarthy. I think he's as good, if not better of a passer. He's obviously the better athlete of the two. I mean, he is a legitimate threat in the run game, and he will be starting this game versus UConn. And I would expect him to start the rest of the season because I do think he gives Michigan not only the best chance to win the Big Ten, but the best chance of winning a national championship. And I think the way Michigan has looked, regardless of the teams they've played, they've looked at a team that could compete potentially for a national championship. So this one is one that it's not so much about whether Michigan will win. They'll win. It's about whether or not UConn can keep this one close. Look, I was scarred last week by Michigan not covering that 50-plus point spread against Hawaii. I think UConn might be a little bit better than Hawaii, so I'm going to go ahead and take the 46 points here, in part because, after J.J. McCarthy goes out after they get up big, Cade McNamara, when he went in last week, didn't play so well. And I wonder if, they're going to run the football short in the game at that point because that's more Cade McNamara's style. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the 46 points. I just can't deal with these big spreads anymore after last week.
These numbers are ridiculous, Danny.
It's that magic 50. That's the number you have to avoid. 46, go ahead and lay them points. Go ahead and hammer it down. I do think this is going to be about Harbaugh and you can tell he wants J.J. McCarthy to be the starter. It is the better option. I totally agree with you, Brady. And I think he's got to show to the Michigan fan base because there was some pushback from some fans saying, well, man, Cade McNamara brought us a Big Ten championship, got us in the playoffs. We beat Ohio State first time since you're the head coach. Like, what are you doing? I think he wants to put a pretty emphatic exclamation point on the move to J.J. McCarthy. And what better way to do that than to let him show out, to let him go out there, have a massive, game, even if it's a half. I think you'll see some offensive fireworks from Michigan with him there. And UConn is abysmal. They're one of the worst programs, a complete rebuild for Jim Mora. So I think Michigan will have their way. That Hawaii one was close, too, by the way. They almost did cover. It was very close, but I think they're going to be able to cover this massive number.
Oh, Danny, I'm well aware. When you're actually rooting for a team who's already up by 46 at that point in time to figure out a way of covering a 51, 52-point spread, trust me, I'm well aware of how close that game was in the end. But again, scarred by it, can't do it this week.
Only gamblers can say that a 45-point game is close in the end. Let's move on to a game that actually should be close on the scoreboard, and that's number 11 Michigan State going to Washington. Great home field environment there in Seattle. Washington's favored by 3, which I think some people's eyebrows are raising a little bit because of that.
A little bit, they should be. Kalen DeBoer is a great coach. I mean, he's done a good job with bringing Washington back to kind of where it was. I mean, tend to forget the Pac-12 was last relevant when Washington was in the college football playoff. It wasn't Oregon, wasn't USC, wasn't some of these other programs. So it's not like this program is that far removed from having that sort of success. But you look at Michael Penix Jr. and the job that he's done so far. He looks really comfortable, and he should be. He was with Kalen DeBoer previously in his time at Indiana, so he understands the system, he understands the offense, and they do have some playmakers too. Look, I'm on the side of Michigan State on this one, though. I just think they're the better team. Mel Tucker's done a tremendous job of kind of building this roster to compete, hitting the transfer portal. You saw that with Jalen Berger and Jake Broussard coming in the backfield. The only question mark is Peyton Thorne, who really struggled last week, couple turnovers. Is he going to be able to recover and come back from what was a bad performance after looking the part at least week 1? So I'm going to go ahead and take the 3 points here in Michigan State on the road. I think they've got to have this win if they want to consider themselves a part of the top of the Big Ten, at least in contention with the Ohio States and the Michigans like they were just a year ago.
So anytime I see a line like this where you feel like Michigan State's the better team, they've had better success recently, like, hey, you should take them here. I don't know. It's a red flag for me. So I'm going to go ahead and take Washington. I'm going to take the Huskies here. And if I had an SEC theme, I also have a Pac-12 theme because I think the Pac-12, who has been battered, bruised, and just kicked aside from college football, they're having a little bit of a resurgence here. And they have several teams that should be ranked in the top 5. Go check out what Washington State did against Wisconsin. Oregon State's 2-0 was 2 impressive wins. I think COVID and the COVID year absolutely crushed the Pac-12. They lost a year of development. Washington's a perfect example. Only played 4 games back in 2020. And that's just, you're losing development. You're losing players. Now that they're that's in the rear view and they're able to get a season under their belt, they're able to develop their players. There's still some pretty good talent in this Washington team, which also had an absolute debacle last year with the Jimmy Lake situation. I liked Kalen Bohr a lot coming in there, offensive-minded coach, and he's reunited with his old quarterback from Indiana, and Michael Penix, who's good when he's on. He can be very erratic, but Kalen DeBoer has been able to kind of maximize what he's been given with Michael Penix. I think he has a nice game. I'm going to go ahead and lay the points here with Washington.
Okay, checking the picks from Danny Kanell and Brady Quinn. Just really very few games where they agree against the spread. Disagree. Only place we can find agreement is on totals. They do like the under in UConn and Michigan, the total of 57.5. Go under there. Time to look at the ACC. Hey, Liberty off to a good start this season. They just upset UAB at home. They're getting 16.5 at Wake Forest. Texas Tech. They just picked, who did they just beat? Houston? Yeah, they just beat Houston. And they're at NC State, team that's been shaky at times this season. Pitt coming off that loss to Tennessee. Clemson, big old number against La Tech. And we already picked Miami and Texas A&M. That's one of 2 ranked matchups this week. All right. Clemson, minus 33.5 against Louisiana Tech. DJ, getting any better?
Yeah. I mean, he still threw an interception last week versus Furman. It was an efficient, play for him, but wasn't necessarily their best performance. This team is still right now led by the rushing attack and by their defense. And so this is one where when I look at that big line, that big number, I have a hard time buying into Clemson being able to maintain that spread and laying the 33.5 points. So I'll gladly take them. Parker McNeil, bigger quarterback. You'll be able to see him back there. He's been nice connecting with Cyrus Allen, the freshman wide receiver for La Tech. So I think they can keep this within the number. Has kind of that backdoor feel, Danny, to me, when it's all said and done. I do think a 54.5, though. I wouldn't be shocked if Clemson didn't do the majority of the scoring and hit that over as well.
Yeah, I'm on the same side with you. I don't trust Clemson yet. Like, how can you? It's still been like they played Furman and it was okay. It wasn't spectacular, though. They're not out there dropping 70 like some teams are when they play an FCS opponent. By no means is an offensive juggernaut. I still want to see what happens. Like, is DJ gonna figure it out? Are they gonna be that team? Maybe they're not. Maybe they're a team that just rides that defense, which is one of the best in the country. So I watched Louisiana Tech against Missouri in their first game of the season. They actually played them pretty tough. I think that could be, I think it'll be I'm on the under, but I totally see what you're saying about the backdoor cover. I just think that I have a tremendous amount of respect for that Clemson defense, but I don't yet for that offense, which is why I'm going to go ahead and take the dog here too. 33.5 for that offense. I can't trust it yet.
Louisiana Tech put a scare into some Power 5 teams last season, including a team from the ACC, NC State. Again, Louisiana Tech would tell you they probably should have won. NC State is taking on Texas Tech in a Big 12 versus ACC matchup. Texas Tech just beat a good Houston team.
Yeah, they did with their backup quarterback, Donovan Smith, who's played well in place of Tyler Shuck. So something to kind of keep an eye on moving forward. I want to talk about NC State, though. After kind of early concerns about really what this team was going to be at week 1, they eliminated some of those concerns, beating the crap out of Charleston Southern last week. So I think you're feeling good again about NC State and the ACC as far as what they're capable of doing. Look, Devin Leary's one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC. I don't think we'll have any problem with the Texas Tech defense either. So the only concern I have right now, Dave Doeren, getting a lot of attention for potential interest in that Nebraska job that's now open. Rumors around that, if that has any impact whatsoever in the locker room, if people are buying into that. But this is one where I'm laying the 10.5 points here, that double-digit spread, and on the side of NC State here. Danny, what do you have?
I'm with you. Same. Devin Leary, was a rough start against East Carolina game. They should have lost. I mean, frankly, they should have lost that game, but they didn't. And then they bounced back last week. Really nice. And it kind of goes back to my philosophy about, college teams have to get a game to get their feet underneath them. It was a hostile environment. East Carolina, it was their Super Bowl, playing against an in-state rival. Since then, they've kind of erased that from their memory. And Dave Doran is one of the more underrated coaches in the country. He's pretty straight-laced, doesn't give you a lot of quotes. He doesn't dance. He doesn't go viral for, social media sensation by any means. But he can flat out coach, and they're usually pretty physically tough too. And Texas Tech, there's a lot of excitement about Joey McGuire and the 2-0 start. I'm curious to know them after a game which is a thriller towards the end. They come out. Is there going to be a letdown for them now having to take this thing on the road? So I'll go ahead and take the Wolfpack here as well. I'm on the under. Don't love it as much as I do like the Wolfpack laying the points.
Rolling with Tuffy and the Wolfpack. You ever had a Tuffy beer there, Brady?
I have not. Will Brinson's actually offered me at least a couple dozen cases.
You've turned him down?
I've turned it down every time.
Brinson has a waterbed that's just full of Tuffy beer that he sleeps on. That's how big of a fan he is.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Liberty at number 19 Wake. And that was impressive. Sam Hartman returning. Great story there. Just lights up Vanderbilt. 300 yards, 4 passing touchdowns. Wake looks like a legit team again in the ACC.
Welcome back, Sam Hartman. It's good to see him come back and recover from whatever medical ailment he was dealing with. But good to see that. And really, it didn't seem like they skipped a beat whatsoever with his chemistry down the field to A.T. Perry. As you can see, one of the touchdown catches, part of that 140-yard performance by A.T. Perry. But it's not so much the offense. We've known this, all right, with this Dave Clawson team, the slow RPOs they have. To me, it's the defense and the way the Wake defense has really stepped up. What they did last week to Mike Wright, who got benched after throwing an interception, only gave him 17 yards on the ground. And look, Liberty's coming in town. They've got a very similar structure there with Caden Salter at quarterback, where he's basically their entire offense. So for Dave Clawson and his crew, I think it's more to me about the defense shutting down what Liberty is bringing to the table. So big spread here. I'm laying the points, though, with Wake, with Sam Hartman back. I do think they're going to be able to put up a pretty big number. I like the over, too, as you pretty much should in most of these Wake Forest games.
Yeah, they really have. I'm on the under on this one. Just curious to see if Wake. I'm really wondering what Vanderbilt was about. I mean, we'll see. They have a chance against Northern Illinois to hit their win total of 2.5 to go over, which was one of my favorite locks. But this might be it for that to cash. We'll see what happens there. But I'm curious to see what happens now coming back home. Sam Hartman returns. He was phenomenal. It's a great story. That absolutely nothing there to see that was a cause for concern. But Liberty, this is their Super Bowl. This is where Hugh Freeze has had a ton of success against the ACC, which terrifies me in this spot. You can see Liberty, they're 3-1 against the spread, and they've actually had some outright upsets in the last few seasons where, Hugh Freeze, his offensive attack is pretty successful. He's had some sort of like Malik Willis, Caden Salter's trying to play that role. He's not anywhere near the athlete, but they put a lot of pressure on their quarterback to provide a lot of offense. I think they'll get it and stay inside the number on this one.
Danny, how about a nationally ranked ACC team going on a MAC campus and Western Michigan hosting Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh's an 11.5-point favorite, and Western Michigan beat Pittsburgh last year.
Yeah, and I think the natural inclination is to say, well, Pitt's going to really, just open up a can on them after that loss last year. It was their only blemish while they were left out of the playoff conversation. That was a tough, physical, emotional loss at home this past weekend against Tennessee. Not only that, the physicality of it knocked Keaton Slovis out of the game, probably comes back, it was an undisclosed injury, was trying to find out some of that, whether they go with him or Nick Patty. But I think Pitt wins, but I think it's probably by about 10 because Western Michigan on the road is going to be a pretty tough spot. They know what they're capable of. They know that they could beat them just like they did last year. I think Pitt's going to have a hard time replicating the atmosphere that they played against. And the backyard brawl was one of the best atmospheres we've seen. They had another great atmosphere against Tennessee. Now it's going to be a little bit sleepier there at Western Michigan. So I'll go ahead and take the home dog in this one.
Hey, what are you saying about Waldo Stadium in Kalamazoo? You saying it's not going to be hopping for this one?
I've called games there, Chris. I'm sure you have too. It's not exactly the most they'll have a nice crowd, but it's not electric.
And for that reason, this is why I'm on the side of Pitt here. I think they know they can't stumble again like they did a year ago. Let's not forget, too, Jake Salopek, the freshman quarterback for Western Michigan, they're kind of breaking in. He's going to have a doozy with the Pitt defense that, look, it's not your typical Pat Narduzzi defense.
He's going to have a doozy with Narduzzi's defense.
I don't think he's going to have a doozy. I think it's going to be a doozy taking on this Pitt defense. But the bottom line is they haven't been the same Pitt defense we saw in the past. This was the more experienced group coming into the season. Hasn't quite worked out that way. I don't know if Rodney Hammond Jr. is going to be back in the backfield yet, if he's healthy. But if Keaton Slovis isn't, that's concerning for me. At this point in time, I actually don't want to lay a bet on the spread. I'd rather take the over. I think it does hit the over in this case. But if I had to pick the spread, I'd lay the 11.5 points. I do think Slovis will end up playing in this one when it's all said and done, and Pitt gets the win.
Waldo Stadium, the site for that one, Western Michigan and Pittsburgh. All right, we did get some agreement on point spreads in the ACC. Louisiana Tech at Clemson plus 33.5 they agree on. Also NC State minus 16.5 at home against Texas Tech. But that's all they agree on, point spread. The Pac-12 and the Big 12 together on one screen.
Is there a merger coming?
Might be a good idea for both those conferences to merge. You got Oklahoma, Nebraska. It's an old Big 8 rivalry. Baylor, Texas State. That's not an old cool rivalry, but it is an in-state game. Another in-state game at Texas. This one might be good. UTSA at Texas. That's a tricky spot for the Longhorns coming off that Alabama game. Utah against San Diego State and USC against Fresno State. Over-under number of replays they show the Reggie Bush run on that game. It is a Fox game as well, so I would say 1.5.
I would say 20.5. A lot of USC alums there at Fox. Trust me, they're unbearable to deal with.
I believe you. That's Brady Quinn. That's Danny Kanell. I'm Chris Hassel. Let's start with USC. 12-point favorite against Fresno. The total is 71.5.
That's too much for me. I mean, look, I know USC's got a prolific offense right now with Lincoln Riley, some of the creativity that he's bringing to this offense now they didn't have under Clay Helton. Obviously, Caleb Williams, who's put himself now in the second position for the Heisman favorite. And then Jordan Addison, who's just been phenomenal this year. 12 receptions, 4 touchdowns. I mean, he's been incredible. And so this game's not so much to me about what USC's defense does. They're still work in progress. Look, they're tied for third in the country in getting interceptions, and they've converted a lot of those interceptions into touchdowns. That's not sustainable. What is sustainable? This offense, and no one being able to keep up with playmakers like a Jordan Addison and the rest of this roster, or stop Caleb Williams even when he takes off and runs the football. So I think it's a high-scoring affair. It doesn't quite hit that over, but it's one where they're able to cover the 12-point spread here. I don't think Jake Haener and Fresno State are going to be able to keep up, Danny.
So I'm with you on the under. It's just a principle under. The number's too high. I want to see, what exactly unfolds. But I'm going to go with Jake Haener, who was known as the Pac-12 killer until he lost to Oregon State last week. But he did have a signature win last year. He did have the signature win last year against UCLA, playing against he started his career at Washington. And I promise you guys can hold me to this, because I've faded. This will be the third week in a row I've faded USC, like figuring, all right, I don't know if I buy into the hype. I'm close. I'm getting there, but not yet. I want to see one more chance if they're going to make me look foolish. Then I promise you I'll start laying the points, take them as a favorite every single time. But I think Fresno State feeling like they can go in there and hang with this, Super Bowl opportunity for them. How does USC do in this spot? I'm very curious to see. I hope this one's close. I want to see USC on the national stage in close games, but it terrifies me at the same time.
Mountain West team going into a Pac-12 team and a ranked team as well, double-digit dog, just like our next game. It's San Diego State out of the Mountain West at number 14 Utah.
It's a big spread for me when you look at the fact that Utah, they've been solid this year, but and they rebounded last week. That's all good and great, but these two teams are almost like identical when you look at their style of play and what they want to do. Stingy defenses want to run the football, and you've got an experienced quarterback in Braxton Burmeister, who originally started his career in Oregon. He's familiar with the Pac-12, transferred to Virginia Tech. Now he's at San Diego State, second on the team in rushing. So this is one where I think his experience combined with the rushing attack and defense of San Diego State is able to keep it close. And this is a game that I think is going to, you see that clock tick, 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 tick. So I'm going to take the 21 points here in San Diego State. It's a big number for me with the Utah team that I'm sure they have a lot to prove. But the reality is San Diego State's a solid program. Brady Hoke's done a good job with them. So I'm willing to say this one stays within that number.
So I totally agree with a lot you said. Brady Hoke's done a phenomenal job. The stat on here, in the last 8 games against Power 5 teams, they've had a lot of success against the Pac-12. Something's going on there, though. I mean, they've had their controversy, which is very unfortunate and unseemly, and it's, they're trying to figure out exactly what's happening with some off-the-field issues. It's affected their play on the field. They lost to Arizona earlier, which is kind of one of those, whoa, wait a second, what just happened there? So I want to see how they stack up here against Utah, who I still think, after the loss to Florida, they were written off. I don't think we should. I still think Cam Rising's a really good quarterback, and I think San Diego State's style of play feeds right into what Utah wants you to do. Go ahead, try to run it against us. So I got it in a lower scoring affair, and I think they do get the number here. I think they cover playing at home. There'll be some excitement there for Utah. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the 21.
Okay, those are the Pac-12 games. Let's go to the Big 12 ranked games. Number 6, Oklahoma. Giving 13 at Nebraska the week that they fire Scott Frost. This always scares me as a fan of a team that has to face a team that just fired their coach, because so many times you see it. They rally behind the new guy.
Right. Dead cat bounce back. You hear those sorts of phrases that are brought out for like investing terms and all that. Mickey Joseph maybe can help kind of lead this team. This is a close game last year, between these two teams in Norman. Oklahoma ended up winning the game. They obviously didn't cover in that respect. But, I mean, look, Nebraska is really a conundrum. When you watch them on tape, it's like a different thing is causing them to lose games each week. They can be great against the run one week, and then the next week it's what caused them to lose a game. Casey Thompson, I thought, played well enough last week to beat Georgia Southern. Unfortunately, they couldn't stop Georgia Southern's rushing attack and some of the big plays that came off of that. So this is one where I don't know that they have to worry about that quite as much with Oklahoma, where they kind of rely more on the arm of Dylan Gabriel and Jeff Lebby and everything they do through the air. But the Oklahoma defense is back with Brent Venables. This is back more to like the Bob Stoops coached Oklahoma team. So I think points could be hard to come by, but I do think there'll be some tricks. There'll be caution thrown to the wind. So I'm looking at saying I'll take the 13 points and the under. I think this will be a competitive game, one in which, Danny, I think you could see a little extra juice there from the Nebraska corners. And especially if it's a tight game, Danny, they might be saying, hey, Scott Frost isn't here anymore.
Yeah,
maybe we can actually close one of these things out.
Yes, we have a lock unity. I'm on the same exact page as you. I do think there will be a bounce. I think this will be an emotional game. I think, there's a lot of probably, players who are sitting there thinking, man, like what just happened? Their heads are probably spinning. I never had to deal with a coach being fired in the middle of the season after just a handful of games. I do think you'll get the best atmosphere, too, with the sea of red showing up, realizing they probably bought their tickets in the preseason, hoping it was going to be better. We know they always show up with those sellouts. So I think they also realize what happened last year. You mentioned it, being close in that game. And this will be a first real test for Oklahoma to take it on the road. I think this one will be lower scoring, too. Brent Venables has done a phenomenal job on the defense side of the ball, tougher physically, mentally. I think the Sooners are, but I think this will be a game that could be tight in the fourth quarter and possibly, Gary Patterson was the TCU coach that got fired. I remember them the week after he gets fired. They pulled off a massive upset. Chris is totally right. Like I wouldn't be shocked if we're sitting here and it's a massive upset win for Nebraska as one of these, coaches fired, rally around everybody else, us against the world type of moments.
I still can't believe TCU fired a guy who has a statue outside the stadium, Gary Patterson. That's amazing. Let's move on to Baylor, coming off the heartbreaking loss at BYU. Sleepy spot here at home against Texas State.
Sleepy spot. You just lost a game in overtime, too. How does your team respond to the extra minutes, the physical beating? Blake Shapen didn't really play very well now, and I think it's held under 150 yards passing. So this, to me, is a spot where a big number, you'd think Baylor gets on track at home here. I don't know. I think they win this one convincingly, but Lane Hatcher through the air for Texas State and Calvin Hill in the rushing attack. I think they'll be able to keep this one within the 30.5-point spread here. So, look, the Sun Belt's been phenomenal. They were last week. I think they can be this week, too, and at least covering spreads, not necessarily pulling an outright upset. Baylor wins. I want to be clear about that. But 30.5 points, a bit too much after what I saw last week, Danny.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Baylor wins by 4 touchdowns. It's not enough, though, to get that 30.5. This is a massive letdown, emotional letdown. It was a late game, too. It isn't. I mean, you travel back from a game that finishes extremely late. You get, kind of lose sleep. You lose prep for the coaches. Just kind of sets you back a little bit. I think that'll be enough for Texas State to keep it within the number.
Yeah, I kind of wonder the same thing about another team in Texas that's ranked, the Texas Longhorns. Yeah, they got a lot of respect, and they become the first team in 25 years to go from unranked to ranked, losing a game. But you're at home against a Group of 5 team and a really good Group of 5 team in UTSA.
Yeah, the tough thing for me in looking at this, because it's a 10.5-point spread, I'm thinking, okay, I know UTSA has played well this year. Frank Harris is phenomenal. But you just went toe-to-toe with Alabama, and the reigning Heisman Trophy winner in Bryce Young. You shut that offense down, which is a more talented team. No disrespect to UTSA. And Jeff Traylor's done a tremendous job, but I think this Texas team has somewhat arrived. And I know they're not going to have Quinn Ewers. Obviously, the health of Hudson Card is going to come into play here. But I just think with Bijan Robinson, who's underrated in regards to, I think, what he is nationally at the running back position, to me, he's the best back. When you really watch him on tape, his overall ability in the running game, in the passing game, catching the football, I just think they're going to be hard to match up with. So this is one where I'm laying the 10.5 points. I don't think you see a letdown from this team. I think you only see them say, hey, not necessarily that they're here because they didn't pull off the upset, but we can play with the best of them. That's how good we are. And Gary Patterson, you mentioned his name. He had his fingerprints all over that matchup last week versus Alabama, and I think it's going to be a very similar game plan and blueprint for how to stop Frank Harris in this UTSA offense as well. So I'm not saying Texas is back, Danny, but I do think they're going to cover the spread here, and I do think they're going to continue to kind of go up the ranks of the Big 12.
So exactly what you're talking about is something that bothers me, not from you, but from within the program. Like Gary Patterson is taking to Twitter and thanking people for the job he did against Alabama. And Sark is saying, man, this does show where we are as a program. You still lost. Like, I do feel like they've arrived, and they feel like they've arrived in a loss. In the game they should have won. Let's be clear. There were some bad calls. The game should have easily gone their way. I think they should have won the game, but they did lose, and I don't like that mindset. It was something the Florida Gators did last year when they, took Bama to the wire at home. 2-point conversion comes up short, and they were celebrating like, oh, well, we showed how good we are. I still got Texas to show me what they are, and until I see it, back it up, because we've seen Texas over the last decade have moments, flashes where, man, they look like they're headed the right direction. Massive setbacks. This is UTSA's Super Bowl. They've had back-to-back overtime games, which does concern me for them, which makes me the one thing I'm nervous about. But I do think the injury to Hudson Card could be, is he going to be hobbling out there? Is he healthy? You're going to see a steady dose of Bijan Robinson then, which is probably the best thing that could happen. But I think Jeff Traylor is a phenomenal coach. Again, one of these ones where I think they'll amp back up. Even after those emotional first two games, they'll be ready for this game. They probably had circled for a long time.
All right, there you have it. We've picked every game against the spread of the top 25 except for number 8, Oklahoma State, and number 10, Arkansas. They're both playing FCS teams. And of the 20 games we picked, the guys only agreed against the spread on 5. Just 25% of the games they agree on. That tells you maybe this week will be a little bit more wild than we think. There's so many big spreads in this one. Time for the worry-free pick from the guys presented by Zevo. Best bets of this week. Brady, you're going to a game that we did not have on the board. What do you like? Kansas
versus Houston. I know Houston lost last week to Texas Tech, but they did cover the spread. That was one of my few wins that I had. But I'm talking about the over-under here, all right? You know Kansas leads the Big 12 in scoring right now? Yes, wow. 2-0 Kansas. Jalen Daniels has done a tremendous job. Look, I think Clayton Tune's going to recover from the loss to Texas Tech last week. High-scoring affair. Take the over on this one with Kansas and the high-powered offense now that they've got versus a Houston defense that has been known to give up some points. And then on the flip side, we know Houston knows how to score. So the over 62.5, worry-free pick. Don't worry about it. Forget about it. They're going to hit the over a lot of points.
Kansas and Houston, that's like a Final Four basketball game of late. Danny, what's your best bet of the week?
I like it. I like Brady's pick, too. Lance Leipold's doing a phenomenal job with the Jayhawks. If we don't agree much, when we do agree, it might be time to perk up and start taking notice. We agreed on what's going to happen in Lincoln, Nebraska. So I'm going to go ahead and take the Nebraska Cornhuskers, getting those 13 points at home, sea of red, Mickey Joseph era. Let's start it off with a bang. I think you'll get their absolute best in this position. And at some point, with all of those tight games, you have to look at it, and this was a decision that Trev Albert had to make too, was this has got to be on the coaches. Now that you've got Scott Frost out of there, I think this team does have a mental edge thinking, man, we're not going to blow this one. We're going to go ahead and take this thing down to the wire. I think Oklahoma still comes out with the win, but I think it's a tight game in the fourth quarter. So give me Nebraska and those 13 points.
You know, Brent Venables came out today and said he tried to convince Casey Thompson to transfer to Oklahoma instead of Nebraska. Kind of interesting backstory for this matchup.
Yeah, that is interesting. Well, that was one of 2 lock unity picks from you guys this week. It was the Nebraska plus 13 under 65 and both going against Alabama. UL Monroe plus 48.5 and over 60 points in Tuscaloosa. We picked every game, FBS game anyway, against the spread with ranked teams, all 25 of them in action this week. A lot of times when we see these big spreads and you don't see a bunch of ranked-on-ranked matchups, it ends up being a little bit more interesting than we think. That's Brady Quinn, Danny Kanell. I'm Chris Hassel. Thanks for watching.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.